The Secretary General of the United Nations, António Guterres, said that the war in Ukraine threatens to push 1.7 billion people into hunger and poverty. Some 20%, or to say in other words, a fifth of mankind. And this global food crisis looms over the world because Russia has invaded Ukraine. In 2019 to 2021, Ukraine produced almost 10% of the world's wheat and 15% of the maize, and also 15% of the world's barley and almost 50% of the sunflower oil. A number of countries, especially in the Middle East and Africa, depend on the import of these agro-products from Ukraine. Ukraine's seaports, through which 90% of the grain exports were to be shipped, were blocked for months. And this has had immediate consequences, both for the global market, but beyond that, for the people of Northern Africa, already suffering from hunger. The prognosis of the Eurasia Group is that by November 2022, about 1.9 billion people will face severe food shortage and possibly famine. As a consequence of food price increase and shortage of food, a wave of refugees from Africa and Central Asia trying to save themselves may lead to food riots, uprisings, or even terrorist acts. Anyway, their arrival in Europe would completely overburden the member states of the European Union. The war that Russia started is not only at military expansion, but economic hegemony as well. The food crisis created by Russian bombs and tanks gives significant leverage to the Kremlin. Will Moscow allow Ukrainian grain to reach African countries threatened by starvation? Or should the stolen grain not simply be shipped to the friends of Russia in Syria? Now everything depends on the mood of the Kremlin. As Putin mentioned during the negotiations in Turkey, it depends on the readiness of the Western partners to soften the sanctions, de facto to tolerate the crimes of Russia in Ukraine. So, what consequences should the world expect from Russia's blockade of Ukrainian food products? My name is Gregor Razumovsky, and today we'll try to find out a little bit more about Russia as it really is. The UN's Food and Agriculture Organization highlighted that the global food price index hit an all-time high in March 2022, the highest since the FAO's establishment in 1990. According to the UN Food Agency in May 2022, 25 million tons of grain were stuck in Ukraine's ports. Ukraine produces almost 10% of the world's barley and wheat exports. The markets were forced to react to the blockade of food supplies. The shortage of agro-products impacted on the European market. Since February 2022, the prices of bread and cereals in the EU increased by 6.6%. With farmers in Ukraine unable to plant their crops, a shortage of wheat could also be on the horizon. At the moment, finding different suppliers means prices are going up, and the cost of wheat has already hit record highs. Shortages or cost increases for wheat mean an impact on essential foodstuff such as bread, pasta and cereals. Meanwhile, Russia smuggled grain stolen in the occupied areas of Ukraine to sell on the global market or for their own purposes. The Associated Press tells us that the proceeds are used to finance Putin's war. Journalists studied the satellite images, maritime communication data, and found out that 30 vessels transported grain from the Russian-occupied area of Ukraine to the ports of Turkey, Syria, Lebanon and other countries. In order to get the information, they also analyzed the publicly available documents. The publications on social media and the comments of farmers themselves. The investigation showed that Russia stole Ukrainian grain worth some 530 million euros. In particular, the Russians stole grain in Melitopol and loaded it in the ports of Feodosia and Sevastopol. In 2019 to 2021, Ukraine supplied almost 50% of the world's sunflower oil. That's why the world quickly felt the shortage of supply. The EU imports around 200,000 tons of the Ukrainian sunflower oil every month, according to the trade group FedOil. However, because of the war, this number has dramatically gone down. During this period of time, everyone noticed the sunflower oil shortage in supermarket shelves. However, this shortage was the most noticeable in food manufacturing, where sunflower oil is used. Experts predict a shortage of fried food. In simple words, crisps could totally disappear. And in addition to that, all dishes that are prepared with sunflower oil may either disappear from the market or their prices will significantly increase. Today, the supermarkets in Spain and Italy have already started to ration the sale of sunflower oil after the invasion of Ukraine led to panic buying. In some cases, the sunflower oil shortage has been so strong that it contributed to an increase of the prices of its substitutes, as, for instance, wheat or maize oil. Ukraine is the fourth largest maize exporter in the world. In 2019 to 2021, Ukraine supplied 15% of the world's export of this crop. It was expected that in 2022 the country would grow a record crop of maize. The lion's share of it, that is 80%, was meant for export and was supposed to go to customers all over the world. However, the Russian Navy violated the territorial waters of Ukraine, blocking its ports. And the maize supply was interrupted, creating not only food shortage, but also shortage of animal feed. In addition to that, Russia also blocked the export of other Ukrainian types of animal feed, such as sunflower oil crop grist and soybean. The animal feed shortage sent up the prices of meat in particular. What is more, a spike in animal feed prices can lead to a rapid reduction of the number of livestock. The reduction of livestock will decrease the amount of meat on supermarket shelves, which of course leads to considerable price increases. We have seen in the case of the blocked sunflower oil and wheat exports, the shortages were felt almost immediately. And the unprecedented increase in meat prices has already become very much noticeable in some countries. The EU High Representative, Josep Borrell, states that the Russian war against Ukraine and the blockade of the Ukrainian ports interrupts the export of millions of tons of grain and poses a threat of global famine. This is to be considered a war crime, and the Russian Federation will have to bear the consequences. However, Russia takes another viewpoint. The Kremlin propagandists and Putin verstehers of the West put the blame for the world food crisis on the sanctions and those who impose them. Shelling the Ukrainian grain warehouses in hectares of sown fields and destroying entire agricultural complexes and ports, the Kremlin declares its desire to resolve the food issue as quickly and painlessly as possible and declares its readiness to have a dialogue. And in exchange for the restoration of food supply, Russia demands that the sanctions be lifted and that providing Ukraine with weapons is stopped. Russia says that the refusal of the West to accept these conditions signifies the absence of desire to negotiate. And to quote Putin, today many European countries continue to act as colonizers, exactly as they've been doing in previous decades and centuries. It is obvious that with this approach, the scale of food problems in the world will only increase, to our great regret, which can lead to an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe. It is worth mentioning that to avoid all accusations of fueling the food crisis, the Western countries have never imposed direct sanctions on Russian fertilizers and grain. The Eurasia Group predicts that by November 2022, about 1.9 billion people will face food shortages. And according to the World Economic Forum, the African continent depends on grain imports by 60%. Russia's war against Ukraine has caused a price increase by more than 25% on grain. Without Ukrainian grain, countries such as Somalia, Tunisia, Libya, Mauritania and Gambia will be the first to be hit. A food shortage can provoke riots and protests in the poorest countries. A sudden and uncontrollable flow of refugees from Africa and Asia to Europe, and mass starvation mainly in African countries. Germany's Minister for Economic Development and Cooperation, Svenja Schulze, said that combined, the coronavirus epidemic, climate change-induced drought, and the Russian war in Ukraine can lead to the worst famine since World War II, and this may well prove to have been somewhat of a too conservative assessment. Russia's war in Ukraine has pushed the global displacement numbers for the first time above 100 million, and the UN warns that the resulting hunger crisis could force many more to flee their homes. The efforts to address the global food shortage crisis, which has been dramatically aggravated by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, is, according to Filippo Grandi, responsible for the refugees in the United Nations, of paramount importance. To prevent a larger number of people moving, the World Trade Organization Director, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, commented on the food crisis in the following way. There was a danger of a repeat of the food riots that marked the previous period of rapidly rising prices in the late 2000s. She added that we are talking to our members and urging them not to compound this crisis by having export restrictions on food. Setting off social unrest in countries that are at risk of famine contributes to Russia's plan to escalate the conflict. Should the crisis worsen, so goes the Russian logic. It is the responsibility of the West to resolve the crisis and provide humanitarian assistance. This rather perverse argumentation is actively propagated by governments of grain-importing countries that are friendly to Moscow. Absurdly enough, this logic that washes Russia free of all guilt is also spread by Western media and self-acclaimed philosophers. All these things fit marvelously well into Russia's plans to misuse hunger and resulting waves of refugees to bring about instability in the EU. This is the YouTube channel, The Power of Reason. Always remember that our true power lies in rational thought and a clear mind when we are threatened with the daily flow of disinformation and the manipulation of news. So, please do the reasonable thing and subscribe to our channel right now.